introduce myself. My name is Brian Underwood. I'm a developer advocate for Neo4j. So if you are a developer and you need help with Neo4j, I'm happy to do that. You'll find me in the Graph Clinic, but also be around. And obviously you can contact me online, email or Twitter. Happy to answer questions. So first off, who knows what a gist is, like a GitHub gist? Okay, some people, good. So probably fewer people know what a GraphGist is. Probably a lot of people in here don't know what a GraphGist is because you're here. So a gist is very simple. It's something that GitHub set up to make it really easy to share text, be it code or log results or something like that. So you just go to gist.github.com. Paste in what you want to paste in. You can choose the format, so it does syntax highlighting, that sort of thing. And then you can send this nice unique URL to a friend who you want to share that result with. Share the code, whatever, and you can discuss it. I think you might even be able to share it, so you can both sort of collaboratively edit it. And you can even download it as a Git repository. It's very nice. So GraphGists are ASCII doc files. And who here knows what an ASCII doc file is? I should ask that first. Okay, that's about what I thought. So what about Markdown? Okay, so Markdown and ASCII doc are basically ways of writing documents in ASCII in sort of a standardized way. So you can use stars or hyphens for bullet points, and you can put a couple equals there to sort of make a header. And we'll see all this in just a minute when we sort of demonstrate this. But it's a way of having just a very readable text file, but in a very structured format so that it could be potentially turned into HTML or some sort of other document. There's also ways to turn it into Word documents and things like that. So, so ASCII doc is just sort of a format like that. And what a GraphGist is an ASCII doc file with the goal of sharing a solution using a graph database, and specifically Neo4j. And so it'll contain some prose, sort of explaining like, this is what I was trying to do. These are the questions I was trying to answer. What I'm sort of interested in. But then also it contains cipher queries, so that you can demonstrate queries on a graph database and actually demonstrate what it is that you're trying to do and how you did it. So the cool thing about this is that what we did, we created a website where you can look at your GraphGists that you've created and share them and submit them for the whole world to see. And they're basically backed by a Neo4j database. And so basically when someone goes to look at your GraphGist on the website, it'll actually execute your queries and show the results to the reader live in the website so that they can see the results of the queries. So very cool. And you can also, you see the table results, but you can also see graph results from Cypher graphs that you've made. And again, we'll create a GraphGist in a few minutes here, and I'll show you how that works. And optionally, you can also put a console somewhere in the GraphGist that the reader of the GraphGist that you've made can play around with the data that you've put into this temporary database, which is pretty cool. So they can get results in table or graph format. So why would you want to make a GraphGist? You might want to just sort of think through something. It's kind of like a blogging process. You want to sort of, what's my questions? What's my sort of, it's almost like writing an academic paper. What's my process? What did I do? You might just want to sort of publicize yourself. Again, sort of like writing a blog post. You say like, this is the sort of stuff that me or my company's doing. This is why it's cool. This is how you can sort of do the same thing, and sharing skills. It also could just be that you want to internally have some documentation for this thing that you've been working on, and your team, you want to have continuity from person to person in your team. And so you might want to have this sort of documentation that's this sort of live. And also, of course, you might just want to show everybody why Neo4j is cool and help spread the word and show really, really cool solutions with Neo4j, because there's lots of room for showing really cool stuff. But of course, the best reason is that you get a free t-shirt if you submit a GraphGist to the website. So there's that. Intrinsic, extrinsic, you know. So let's talk about, really quickly, before we really get into GraphGist, let's talk briefly about how the website works that we made for displaying the GraphGists. So, and also just sort of how they work in general. So again, you can host a GraphGist anywhere. It's just a text file hosted on GitHub Gist. You can host it from a GitHub repository, host it on Dropbox, whatever, as long as it has a URL, it's public. And then there is a Node.js application, which is just a server application for those that aren't familiar, written in JavaScript, that whenever someone wants to look at your gist, it goes to that source, gets the file from GitHub Gist, for example, and caches that result, and then turns it into HTML that can be displayed on the web page. So that's just the really basic stuff, is that you need to do formatting like bold and headers and italics and all that stuff. That's the stuff that's sort of sent up to the server. And there's some transformation of some things into HTML to make it possible to put your table results and your graphs in there. And then once the GraphGist has been sent up to the browser, then there's some JavaScript in the browser that does some processing, basically inside of the reader's browser, colorizes the cipher and any other sort of queries that you have in there. Goes and makes a request to set up that database, that temporary database where the data is going to be put and queried, and then goes and makes those queries and renders tables of data and visual graphs that have been represented with the cipher queries in the GraphGist. And then also, if you've decided to put it in your GraphGist, there's a console that shows shows a graph view, and also you can type in some queries there. The reader can type in some queries to sort of take the cipher that you've made and maybe do something else with it. Another sort of side note is it's using AngularJS in the front end, which basically just makes it so that everything sort of happens in the browser, and that as you go from gist to gist or around the website, it's just requesting little bits of data from the server, which makes it super fast. And I'm pretty proud of that, because I was working on that site. Does this all make sense, by the way? Are there any questions? I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
So I've got a question.
Yeah, please.
The data, the database, is that in the GraphGist ASCII file, or is it a separate file? Or?
So that's a good question. So the database is actually on a separate server, and so it's just once the gist is loaded, queries are made to that separate website through sort of an API interface that makes those queries in the temporary database to set up the data, and then makes queries to get data out of it. So yeah, but that's a good question. It's blurring the lines of reality almost in a way. It's like, what is this document that I'm looking at? Yeah, good question. Anything else? Yeah?
When we provide the console, does that mean that anyone who uses that console can actually modify the data set that we provided?
I'm pretty sure, actually. That's a really good question. I don't know what would happen if you did deletes and creates and things like that. I'm guessing it would execute those in the database. But again, it's this, every reader of the gist gets their own sort of temporary database to do those queries, and so it's actually not that big of a deal. So I wanted to show you a few examples of GraphGists. Maybe I'll click on these so you can see sort of how they work. Oh, yeah, so here's one. So if you go to graphgist.neo4j.com, by the way, that's the site that we have set up. And so this is one of our GraphGists. It's showing how to analyze fraud in potentially looking for fraud in a data set of offshore entities and their connections with people and other entities. And so here you can see the graph model. And so this is just a static image. Any GraphGist, Markdown, all that, you can embed images in them, and those just have to have a URL that can be accessed and loaded. And so that's what's happening here. Is this is just a static image. More pros. And here you see just sort of an acknowledgement that the query was run to set up the data. You can see the graph that was loaded from the data. And these are some basic Cypher queries that people are running and getting results from. So here you can see these are the results from this Cypher query live, which is pretty neat. And you can also, just as a nice little thing, you can filter on the data or change the number of entries you want to see in the output. So pretty neat. So this is a cool I was sort of looking through, trying to find a couple of examples of, I think, really good demonstrative GraphGists. And this is, again, searching for potential fraud in connections between offshore companies, maybe looking for shell companies with suspicious relationships. Another example is this GraphGist, which is all about representing, I think in London, actually. I didn't even think about the fact that that we're in London, but is representing pipes and valves throughout the water system in London. And basically London has a big problem with an outdated pipe infrastructure, which is leaking a lot of water that's not ideal. And it also has apparently some valves turn clockwise, some valves turn anti-clockwise. And so all this data sort of needs to be tracked and figured out. And there's also remote access to some of these valves that from a central location they can sort of turn these valves on and off. And so one of the things that this explores is putting these pipes into a graph that shows the relationships between them and their valves, so that you could potentially look for a minimum number of valves that you'd want to turn off the water supply to a particular place where some flooding is happening because of a broken pipe or something like that. And I don't actually think that he got into a final result in figuring out the minimum number of valves to turn, but it's really still an interesting gist to read in that topic. And then a last gist, it's a pretty common use case, just talking about social networking and creating a set of users that are related to each other, and how you might want to, and also, users that are friends with each other and that have movies that they've watched and rated, so that you can potentially recommend movies to someone that their friends liked in particular. And so this sort of, again, two of the big use cases of Neo4j are social and recommendations, and I think this covers both of them. So that's why I thought it was kind of a cool gist to mention. So let's make a gist. Let's say, so I was trying to think of a graph gist that I could create and present, and I was doing this on the plane, and I didn't have any Wi-Fi on the plane, and I was really frustrated with this. So I was like, I wonder if you could create a graph where do a query on a set of flights that determined, let's say I'm taking a number of hops between two different places, how much time would I have Wi-Fi on my journey, and how can I plan my trip so that I have maximum Wi-Fi? So, I know, right? So let's assume, Hitmonk, I think it's Hitmonk has their agony score, which is based on a number of different things. Let's just assume all we care about is Wi-Fi. We want as much Wi-Fi as possible. So let's maximum Wi-Fi. We're going to create a gist on GitHub, and this is going to be an ASCII doc. Boom. Add file. Show. Oh, right. No, that's not what I want to do. Sorry. I don't want to add a file. I want to save this file that I have. I want to find out how to find what might have the most Wi-Fi. So this is just sort of showing you how easy it is to sort of throw together a gist. I create a public gist. Here I've got this URL here, and I copy it. Go to graphgist.neo4j.com and submit a GraphGist. And here what I can do, put this URL in, and I can preview it. So very basic, nothing graphy about it, but we see that it's working. We can iterate now. So let us set up the data. So I actually happen to have some ASCII doc syntax here. So what I'm doing is we're using the built-in ASCII doc way of representing a block of source code. So here I say source, and I'm giving it the language that I am putting the source in, and then there's some hyphens here that sort of separate out where the source code is. And this is all just a cipher create statement. And I'm going to put this is an ASCII doc comment, but if you use a special comment for GraphGists, where if you put // setup, then it's basically saying the next query that comes along, that's going to be the setup query, which is special, and it's going to run first. And update gist. So again, we're just going to iterate on this, reload the page. Boom, we have a query. It's my setup query. And I can also show hide the live console, so you can see match and return and limit to. See, I'm returning some data. London and Reykjavik. I'm currently in Reykjavik. This is why Reykjavik is one of the options here. So let's go back. Let's edit this gist again, and we'll say, okay, now we got this data in here. Oh, and actually, I should show you what it is. What we're sort of going to try to find out is going from London to New York. What options do I have available for me for maximum Wi-Fi? So here we have London, and you can see here highlighted in red, by the way, these are the nodes that sort of got found. So going from London to New York, I have a flight through 2 flights through Reykjavik. I have 2 flights through Paris, 2 flights through Lisbon, or alternatively, I could go Lisbon to Paris to New York. So I want to throw in there sort of a 3-hop situation, which is very unrealistic, but is demonstrative at least. So I have that. You can really see this is just very basic cipher. And I'm going to first show you that I can make again, just a cipher source. This is our graph. And I'm just going to do the universal query to get all the nodes because it's not a very big database. It just has 5 nodes or something. And then I'm again going to do a special ASCII doc comment to show that, say, this is where I want to put the graph in my result. So update gist, reload this page, loading the graph. So you can see it was running those queries there, and now we see the graph in here. So this is sort of what we're demonstrating to people, saying like we want to show you this is what our overall graph is. I could pick a certain subset of that if I wanted to demonstrate some particular aspect of the thing that I'm doing in my GraphGist. But here I'm just outputting the entire graph because it's not very big. And then here we'll go through this cipher in a moment. Edit, throw this cipher in here. One way we could accomplish this is using blind statement. So there's actually, I found 2 ways to sort of accomplish this task, which sort of have their, each sort of has their pluses and minuses. So we'll sort of look at what those are. So we load this. Should be relatively quick. I want to make up some time for this tight schedule here. I don't know what's going on there. There we go. So we can see here that I got all the paths going from London to New York City, And for each of those, I'm getting all the relationships as an array in that path. So I'm assigning, I don't know if everybody's familiar with this syntax, but you can get a path as a variable. You can get all the relationships out of that. I'm sort of using with to turn those relationships from as an array in a row into a set of rows. So it's sort of pivoting the data and turning that into a set of rows so that I can do a sum on the duration. Say like, okay, what's my total duration for this particular path? And then I'm doing that sum aggregates it back together again, so I actually have that path. I'm realizing this is a somewhat complicated query, but basically what is happening is that I'm summing the duration together, unwinding it again, and then specifying I only want flights with Wi-Fi, and so that I'm aggregating it up again with both that original total that we got, but also the Wi-Fi percentage that we got, and we're ordering by Wi-Fi percentage, and so we end up with this query that we have. Okay, we have 4 options available to us. One of them has 2 plane hops. Three of them have 2 plane hops. One of them has 3. This particular flight has a 420-minute flight, but 31.3% of the time I have Wi-Fi. Whereas this is a shorter flight, but only 83% of the time it has Wi-Fi. So I'm going to go with the first one because Wi-Fi. But you could theoretically, if you wanted to sort of throw in some other logic that was like, I want to actually, temper that a little bit to say like, okay, but I don't want to be spending too much time on a flight, that you could do that too. And so this is just another way to accomplish this is to, in my GraphGist, go down to the bottom, throw this in. So I'm throwing this other query in, which is a different solution, outputting the table as the result of this query, and also a console at the very bottom. So this is, I'm saying, I want to give readers of my GraphGist the option to query my data as they see fit. Update the gist. Reload. And we get the graph. We get that first table. We can see the second table is identical to the first table. And the way this is working is actually a little bit simpler. We're taking that path, again, from London to New York City. We're unwinding the relationships so that they're a set of rows instead. And then we're going to sum up the total duration. We're also going to sum up the duration with a case statement saying where case Wi-Fi true, add up the duration, else I don't care about it, so I'm going to add it up as 0. So it's going to sum up just the duration with the Wi-Fi. And that gives me these 2 numbers, Wi-Fi total and total. And I can also, I'm passing it through as a with, so I can just do a simple division on those variables that I've created without having to specify this entire sum again and this other entire sum again and doing a division on that, because that just seemed painful. But this sort of, I think I prefer this way of querying, but you sort of have 2 options available to you in this particular case. So I know that was very fast, but I wanted to make sure we get in time, and also so that I have a little time for questions. So please, any questions? Yeah?
Can you show us how to add simple images?
Simple images, sure. I'd have to ASCII doc image. I think it's ASCII doc cheat sheet. Image. So, right. So you do image, basically image colon, and then you give it the path. So if I go to google.com, which is, this is probably not an image, this is probably a copy image URL. Maybe it is an image. Yay, it is. So then I can go into my GraphGist, say edit, image colon, that Google logo. This is my alt text for when I mouse over. Update gist, reload. We see that in there at the bottom. And if I mouse over, it should say Google logo. Yeah, so pretty straightforward. And links are sort of a similar well, they can be something sort of similar. You could say link, and you give it a path, and then in brackets you say, like, this is the text I want my link to be. So it's a very similar sort of format. I feel like there's another syntax for making links. I know in Markdown it's sort of as simple as, text for link url.com. So, but ASCII doc isn't that. It's something similar. I don't remember at the moment. Yeah.
Are each of the gists that are available here, are they all open to everybody, or is there a concept of a secure gist that you can just share with individuals?
Good question. So I'll show you just a quick secret that when you can go to this preview URL and you can put in a gist for a certain URL, like this URL here, preview. But really, you can go to, I'm just going to copy this gist ID from, it's just this right here. If you go to featured gists, just pick a gist and then replace the ID with that in the URL, then that's the URL. So it's not secret, it's secret.
Yeah, I understand. It's not published.
Although it's not published, if you make this is maybe a good question. If we make this a private gist, which I think makes secret, then yeah, this still works. So, and this is making an API request to GitHub, so I wanted to make sure that still works, and I think it does. So, yeah, yep.
So actually, we can have the source of the scripts in GitHub. Can you have the destination of the results somewhere else? I mean, can you consume that from some other place?
That's a good question. You can, I know with load CSV in Cypher, you can specify a URL if you wanted to load like something from a CSV remotely. Is that sort of?
No, actually, I was wondering if I can consume the result from the graphs from this stuff produced on the Neo4j domain. If I can use this stuff as an input to some other domain, like having the Neo4j like the engine which consumes GitHub stuff and produces some results for some other destination instead of the actual Neo4j destination.
I'm not exactly sure. I mean, that might be. You mean with like GitHub gists or?
I mean, producing some results which can be shown not just on the GraphGist Neo4j but can consume from some other side.
I don't think so. I think it's just executing Cypher commands. So anything you can do with Cypher, you can do, but it doesn't run any scripts or anything. So I'm going to say no, unless maybe you might be able to play around with like JavaScript that can be run on your console via Chrome plugin or something like that. But no, I think so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
This reminds me very much of something I've been doing recently. We produced multiple research, so I've been playing around with R, my programming language. So it's to do with literate programming. So you can actually, as you've done here, you can execute the code
Mm-hmm.
in Markdown or publish the results very well on the site.
Mm-hmm.
I've got an example in front of me actually, I can show you afterwards.
Yeah, of course.
But it seems very much the same thing. So I don't know if you're familiar with the term literate programming from Donald Smith. So it's actually you've got it explores the theme you're actually pursuing.
Mm-hmm.
And it has the code in there in front of you, but it actually can execute it and publish results at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely into that sort of idea. And
It's along the same lines, obviously.
yeah, and I think particularly I think I like this a lot just because it's like there's like a database running in my browser. Like what is this even? I mean, it's obviously going to a remote server, but it's like much more complicated than just like executing JavaScript or even parsing like Ruby or Java or something in your browser and figuring out what it would have done. But yeah, no, I think I'm familiar with literate programming, and I think it's this sort of along the same lines. I agree. Mm-hmm.
open share up.
Oh, great.
Can I host my own GraphGist server? I mean, it's the same of privacy, but I don't want to expose it. I want for my own project and to share with other worker, but not on the web. Can I or not?
So it would take a little bit of work, but I think you'd be able to do it. So the code, all the code for this portal is open source. So if you go to Neo4j contrib GraphGist-CMS, I'll leave that URL up there. But basically, this is the node application that serves up. You know, it's just deployed to Heroku with some environment variables set. And there's some client-side code in there that gets served up, and so you probably have to play with that some, and you might want to mess with the style, the layout page, because this is very much designed to look like neo4j.com. And I also really like to, at some point, modularize the client-side code so that you can essentially just take, and actually it used to be the case, maybe this code is still around, but if you go to gist.neo4j.org, I believe, I don't remember exactly how this works, but it basically was designed to work entirely client-side, and we've moved a little bit of it server-side in order to speed up processing and be able to cache and things like that. But we did have an implementation that was designed to run like sort of entirely in the client side, so that it's very portable. And I'd like to have something like that as sort of made available, that anybody can have their own sort of private documentation server. I think that would be great. But yes, with caveats. Yeah, I'll leave this up again. Anything else? Okay, cool. Well, enjoy your fika. Thank you.